the series on building your e-commerce application in Node.js. In this video, we are going to discuss about how you can add some very cool unit tests to your application. As you guys know, that testing your application is one of the most fundamental and one of the most important feature requirement that is there while developing anything in the industry. And we are going to see how easily we can add some cool unit tests into our application. So for this video tutorial purpose, we are going to use the category controller in order to just add few unit tests there. So let's just start. So first of all, what you can do is we have already installed a package named Jest. So you can see package.json, there is already Jest installed. So Jest is a library that we can use in order to test our application. And now what we can do is we can add a new folder, tests. Inside the tests, we are going to make a new folder, controller. We write test for controller here. And we are going to make a new file, mocker.js. Right. Okay. Now what this mocker.js is all about. So this mocker.js is going to help us to mock few functions, right? Like request object or response object, or like it can mock objects, it can mock functions, right? So what we can do is we can write a function mock request. So what it is going to do, it is going to mock as exactly how our HTTP request looks like. So we'll say const request, then we can say request.body is equals to jest dot function dot mock return value as request. Right. Now what I'm doing here, now you know that whenever you call the request body, it actually returns the whole request object only, right? So whenever you make any changes, like let me add one more thing, let's say request.params, right? So this is going to be the same thing, because these objects, whenever you use these objects, the return value of these from these objects is the object itself only. So we are just using this request, and at last we'll do request. So what it is doing, it is exactly like mocking the return value. Like whenever you want this to return something, then it is going to return the request object only. That is something very important, right? And let's say we can also write a function mock response const response, and we can do the same thing. Like you might have seen, rest dot status actually returns the whole response object only, right? Rest dot status dot I would say send. So rest dot status returns the original response object only. Then on that response object we do dot send. Then this whole returns the original response object only. So that's what we are doing. So rest dot send is equals to, let's copy this, it's a res, then res dot status is equals to this, res dot json. We can add few parameters that we are going to use in the tests and return res. At last we'll do module dot sports mock request mock response, right? And even if you like call mock request, let's just see if it is working fine or not. So node mocker.js, right? Okay, so jest is not defined, so we can say jest. Okay, so jest dot function. So okay, so there is one more library that jest comes with, is jest mock, right? We can use that and see everything is working fine. So you can include jest mock in order to do so. You will, when you install jest, then like simultaneously this jest mocks also gets installed. Now inside the controller, what we are going to do, we are going to make a new file, category controller.js, right? What we are going to do, we are going to test the category controller for us. So first of all, let's just get require mocker. From mocker, we are going to get mock request, mock response. Okay. Then we are going to get say const jest is equals to require just mock, and then we can say const category model is equals to require source models category. Then we can say category controller is equals to require, we'll go one folder back, and then inside source controller category controller. This is something that is ready for us. Now what we can do, we can make a test payload. This test payload is going to be something that we are going to actually test our request on. So let's say category ID as 1, and let's say name as electronics. Right. Okay, so there is some error, I believe. Payload can be an array. This should be good. And one more payload, category ID as 2, name as fashion. Okay. So let's see. This should be an array. Yep, this should work. This is an array. Okay. So this is the test payload. Okay. Cool. Now we'll write few tests. How to write few tests in Jest? What you can do is you can use the it function. So it says that it category controller should return error on all category. Right. How? So we are going to write a asynchronous function. Now we are going to create a spy object. So const spy is equals to just dot spy on category model. And which function of category model? List categories. And then we are going to mock the implementation. We'll pass a callback, right? And we'll say, we'll just call CB with new error. I'll tell you what is happening here. This is a new error, right? And the second parameter we should pass as none. Okay. So you might be thinking what is going on. Now we know that whenever we call category controller, we internally call category model. What unit test says that you want to test category controller. Category model should be tested separately. It's a separate unit. So what you do, you will mock the implementation of category model dot list categories. So what we are going to do, we use the object spy on. It is going to help us to create the mock, and we are going to spy on the category models list category function. And here we say that mock the implementation. So list category function used to take just a callback and then make some changes with the callback, like it used to call the database and do something, right? Let's say in the implementation we got an error directly, right? Like you can get this error, like you call the database and then you got the error, but we are just mocking the implementation, that let's say we got the error only. So what we'll say this, that const request is equals to mock request, const response is equals to mock response. We'll create mock request and response object, which is very much similar to the HTTP request and response object. Now we'll say await category controller dot list categories, will pass request and response, right? Now what should happen is we'll say expect spy dot to have been called, right? What does this means? So this is the spy object, right? This is the mock implementation of the list categories function. So what we say that if you call category controller and this request has been completed, so we are expecting the spy object to have been called, right? And we expect request dot status dot to be, or I would say to have been called with, so this have been called with the value 500, and we'll say expect request dot send dot to have been called with. Now request dot send is called with an object, so the object should be, let's see, inside the category controller. This should be something like this. I'm expecting this response. Okay, cool. So we have wrote one test. Now what we can do is we can go to the jest library, jest npm, right? And you can read about all of these functions on the jest library only, right? So what we can do, we can go to jest.io. We can get the node docs, sorry, docs, and here you can see in the scripts we need to add this test as jest. So we go to package.json and we add test as jest. And in order to run the test, what we can do is we can just run npm run test. So now let's say we'll do npm run test. So it's running the tests, right? And it has found 0 matches. Okay. Now what we have to do is we have to add like our tests there, right? So let me do one thing. Just a second. Okay. So what we can do is in the e-commerce app. Okay. So whatever file you are making in the tests, what you can do, you can rename the file with .test.js. Right. How do I know that? You can see that here. One second. Okay, let's try this. Okay, see, now it is able to fetch this test, right? So wherever you have a file .test.js, it will be able to fetch this test. Okay, so it says that don't use this variable jest. Jest is already declared. So what you can do is you can say jest mock, and wherever you have a jest mock, right? And it should be good. Let's rerun the test. Okay, one failed because in the mocker also there is the same thing, just mock. Okay, and we have few errors. Category controller should return error on all category. So what we can say is, okay, there is one issue. There should be response.send. And what is the status that we should have been called with? Let's see. We should have been called with status 500. Are we calling with status 500? Yes, we are calling res.status. Okay, line number 27. So what's the error? Request.status.to have been called, received value undefined. Okay, let's see. So see here it says value must be a mock or spy function. So we are having just mock return value. Okay, this should be okay. We are saying response, right? So rest.status. This is rest.status, not request.status. This is rest.status, right? And now if you run, see all the tests have been passed, right? So what we are doing here, let's get everything concrete that what exactly we are doing here. So we first of all know that in unit test we have to mock a lot of things, because from where we can bring that http request object, from where we can bring that http response object, right? That is something very difficult. So we just mock the behavior of that object. How? By writing this, because res.send actually returns the response object only. That is the same object only. Res.status returns the same object only. Res.json returns the same object only. So we are just mocking the request response return value for these objects. Now we write our category controller.test.js. We have some test payload. We'll be using this later, right? So now what we have done is, let's say in your model, just consider that in your model, some error occurred. Now in order to mock that, what we are going to do, we are going to use this category model.list categories function, and we are going to mock the implementation of the error that we might get. So we can get any error. So new error object we have created, and then we will call the category controller after making the mock request and response object. We'll pass this request and response object. If the category controller has been called and the error has been hit, that means that status should have been set to 500. We should send this object, and this function, this list categories function should have been called at least once. And if here you can see all the tests are passing, that means everything that we expected it to work like, it is working exactly like that. Now what we can say is, let's just copy everything, and now we say that it should return list of all categories. When it will return list of all categories, right? When we are not going to return a null, we are not going to return a null. Instead, the error will be null, and this will be the test payload, right? The response, the result that my model was going to give me is the test payload. Now mock request, mock response, we'll call it. This py function should be called once. Now the status should be 200, and the message should be successfully fetched categories. Or let's see what is the successfully fetch the category. Let's copy this message. It should be true, and we're also expecting a parameter categories with test payload. Here we will add it as test payload. Okay, now let's just run our test again and see. There were 2 tests and all the tests passed. There was one test suite, like this whole file is one test suite. So all the errors, all the tests have been passed. So this is how you test your application. You write unit test, because in unit test you have to just test one unit module. So if you're testing the controller, just test the controller. If the controller is dependent on some other function, like some library function, util function, model function, mock all of those functions. Now your controller is also dependent on the request and response object. Mock these objects also, because we don't want to get into the logic of the objects. All we want is to ensure the fact that our core controller logic is working fine. This is the whole gist about how exactly testing is done. I hope that before watching this video series, you already had some idea about how tests are done. So this is how you can write more unit tests. So I would like that you guys might write some more tests around maybe product controller, or maybe order controller, or maybe user controller. This can be a very good exercise for you guys. So try to write more tests, and we are going to meet in the next video. Till then, take care guys. Bye bye. Have a great week ahead, and thank you.